Hello, everybody, and welcome back to That's That Podcast. It's, it's your host, Nick, and today we are with the business and marketing teacher of VIS, Byron Clarke. Byron Clarke, say hi to everyone.
Hey guys, great to be here. Thanks for having me, Nick.
Great to have you. Great to have you. All right, so just before going on the podcast, you were explaining to me a lot about just marketing strategies, pitching, and branding. And, it's really interesting, especially in this day and age where most everybody uses or kind of cohabitates with just social media. And, when you do, you were explaining to me, like when you do put something out online, it's kind of either part of your brand or whatever you represent. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think strategy is actually something that's misunderstood. So a lot of people, when they think about strategy, they're just thinking goals, basically. Like, I want to make 10% more profits. I want to reach 20% more people. But this is too difficult for everybody really to understand. What does this mean? What do I have to do? 20% of what? Like, who am I looking for? So there's just too much going on when you're thinking about that kind of strategy. And realistically, if you can ask why and still not understand what's going on, then your strategy is just not good enough. You have to keep asking why until you reach that foundational level of what your business or your operations or whatever you're going through. I mean, even for life, like if you can ask why you're doing something, then you have to go a little bit deeper. And that reflection process about strategy is even more important, to go back and reflect and reassess to make sure that all your goals and everything that you're doing to really push forward goes back into this strategy, and it's really your driving factor.
It's interesting that you mentioned that about just it always being more goal oriented, because to be honest, like when I think of strategy, I also think of like, okay, how can I finish this way or finish the best in regards to like trying to get to this like place that I'm trying to go. So, but you mentioned just like the idea of there's more into strategy, like the ways you go about it. So what would be something in regards to, for example, if a person wanted to start their own, say, online e-commerce business of some sort, like what would be a way that you would start? The first thing you would look at when thinking about your strategy to kind of get more sales and to kind of get publicity?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because actually you're diving right into the dangerous area immediately, right? Like you're going right into the deep end before you can swim. So if it's okay with you, I'll just like start right from the beginning.
Go ahead.
So basically, like the problem with strategy is that if you ask 5 different people, you're probably going to get 5 different answers. If you ask 5 different CEOs, you might get 5 different answers. And really what we're trying to do is get rid of the industry lingo and all the jargon. We want to filter all this out, and we want to break it down to something extremely simple. And I must admit that a lot of this, what I'm going to talk about today, is from the work of Professor Richard Rumelt from UCLA and Anderson School. And it's in his book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which I recommend to basically anybody who wants to learn about strategy, because even if you don't agree with everything that he's written, a lot of the concepts that he writes about they're brilliant. I mean, he breaks it down to make it so simple and gives great examples. But basically, when you're looking at strategy, what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify a high stakes problem. And once you identify this high stakes problem, you can design a plan to overcome whatever this problem might be. You want to position to achieve sustainable profitability and make sure that everything is built, in a strong foundation, and really so you can just have value creation. So basically what we want to do is we want to take 3 steps. First, we want to diagnose the challenge. And from your example, let's say, so e-commerce. So what is the challenge? What problem are you solving? So are you making an e-commerce business to sell, I don't know, pens or something? Who needs a pen? Do you really need an e-commerce to do this? Like, you want to break it down, and then what's your problem? Or what's your challenge to overcome? So how do you get this to people? Like if you look in the grand scheme of things, basically like Microsoft back in, I don't know, the 80s or 90s, their strategy was to put a PC on every desk in the world, basically. Ambitious, sure. Realistic, almost, right? They were pretty close to getting, well, maybe not to every single one in the world, but I mean, they were so dominant that you would almost assume that they had one everywhere. And this is great. So if I'm a brand manager or I'm a line worker or I'm a customer and I know that this is the strategy, all I have to do is say, okay, I'm doing X, I'm doing Y, I'm doing Z. Does that put a desktop on every desk in America, let's say, or Europe or the world? And if no, then don't do it, right? I mean, there could be roundabout things that you might have to do, to appease some, certain aspects of the business. But realistically, everything that you should be doing should be completely directed at that idea. I guess that's a goal if you break it down. But those steps that you take to get to this goal is pretty obvious. So I go there and say, hey, Nick, I saw that you increased the marketing spend by 10%. Why? You could look at me and say, that gets another desk on that gets another desktop on every desk in Cincinnati or something. And I can get behind that and say, I might disagree with it, but at the same time, like we're on the same page. And as a CEO or a business leader, I don't have to look around the company being like, those guys are trying to do that, these people are trying to do that, or whatever. Like everybody should be on the same page. So once you diagnose that challenge, which is probably, in all honesty, probably the toughest part, then we have to go through the pain points of the products and like, how do I get that? So what are the pain points of these customers? So if we go back to the pen example, like, are people having trouble getting pens for some reason? Like, do they need to get them really quickly? I mean, if I could just teleport a pen or something and say, every time you need a pen, it's there, then I mean, that might solve a problem. But realistically, like, I mean, I can look outside the window right now and see 3 or 4 stationery stores, and I'm sure Amazon can get me a pen in like, one day. So really, like, I mean, that's obviously a very like generic example, but I think it breaks it down. And well, a lot of people are doing that, right? You go on for a podcast. What kind of podcast are you going to do? Oh, personal finance. Cool. What problem are you solving that the other 100,000 podcasts aren't? Like, do you have something? Do you have like an expert that everybody wants to listen to? Do you just have like a fun atmosphere or something? Like, you have to have something for the pain point. But then you also have to break it down. Like, so basically when you're looking at internal strategy, you're looking at basically 2 things. Do you have the lowest cost, or are you different in some way? So if we look at, X company, and you might say, okay, no one can produce pens for as little as they do. So they can, in theory, have the lowest price and no one else can match them. Otherwise, they'll just go bankrupt. Or do you have some special, pen that can write in space, underwater, or appear in your hand whenever you need it? And you have to make sure that you're differentiating yourself in some way. So that's what we would go through when we're looking at diagnosing the challenge. And then we can shift that mentality then for, even deeper into, superior efficiency. Like, are you more efficient than anyone else? Do you have better quality? Are you responsive to your customers? Are you innovative? Right? There's a joke that says NASA invented a pen. I mean, I don't know if this is true or not, but let's just pretend it is for now. Invented a pen that could write in space, and it's like, they spent $1 million on it. The Russians, they used a pencil, right? And and if you're looking at that from like a step back a bit, you might say, what is the goal here? What are we trying to do? What problem are we trying to solve? And you can say, I want to write something in space, and probably somebody would say, why don't you just use pencil? Like, that's an obvious answer.
Oh, I like how you delved into the kind of trying to diagnose the challenge that's ahead of you, because I think what you said it best. Just what are you trying to accomplish and how do you get to your end goal? I guess one thing I'm curious about is, do you feel that it's more important to have a competitive price point or this kind of specialization of the thing that you're trying to offer? And when you do decide on which one it goes for, how do you pivot a strategy to kind of get the marketing and get that branding to either illuminate the price point or what your product is doing is better or different than every other product on the market?
Well, to be honest, I mean, I hate to say this, but it depends. So like, if you're Walmart, for example, For years, Walmart, the lowest price. You saw the little happy face and all that kind of stuff. Walmart, I mean, I don't know if they do now. I'm sure they make stuff now, but they didn't always make stuff. And basically, when you're looking at a place like Walmart, like how do they get the cheapest price? Like how can they be lower than Target or anything else? Well, they have these amazing distribution networks, and they have so much purchasing power, right? So they can come to you and say like, we'll buy a million of these, but we want the lowest price possible. And I couldn't do that as a mom and pop shop, and that's why a lot of these small businesses went out of business, because they just couldn't compete. But now, if you're looking at a place like, what's the equivalent of like a premium Walmart? I don't even know. But let's go with like Home Depot. I know this is not a great comparison, but let's go with Home Depot and say like, okay, I'm going to sell. I want to in Home Depot. I want to compete on the lowest price. Oh yeah, by the way, go build a piece under your house with all this like really cheap, low cost stuff. Maybe you're looking at contractors are looking at like, we don't really necessarily need the lowest price. What we need is a balance of quality and price. So you have to be careful, because Home Depot might not want to compete on the lowest price. I mean, maybe they do, but they might not want to compete on the lowest price, where a place like Walmart might. And I know, again, this is not the best example. Like they're not apples to apples comparisons, but if we move into something like differentiation, we can get there. So if you look at a shoe company, for example, like if you look at Nike sells shoes. They, this is just something for your foot, so it doesn't get hurt. Basically, this is how shoes started. People don't want to step on stones and sticks and the glass and all that kind of stuff. But then in the early years of Nike, they started thinking about. I mean, I guess they always had that kind of sports culture, but they started thinking about how athletes run, how they think, how they prepare, and all these kind of stuff. And, they're making like the waffle shoes with the iron press and all that kind of stuff. And then they think about, hey, it'd be really great to have all these world-class athletes wearing our shoes. So what's Nike's differentiation now? We supply the best athletes. So now everyone's thinking like, hey, I can be the best athlete. And Nike's changed so much since those early years. They're going through Blue Ribbon, then they go into Nike, and now they're like arguably a fashion company almost. But then I look at another company, like the shoes I like to wear, called Allbirds, and they're sustainable, comfortable, and stuff like that. I'm somebody who probably won't buy Nikes anymore, not because Nikes are bad or because of whatever, just like they don't really fit my style. Maybe it's sustainable goals that I want to shoot for. Whereas Allbirds are like, they're plain. There's not really, there's a logo on them, but you can barely see it. It's kind of whited out to do. So this is differentiation, right? So maybe Nike's wasting money targeting me. But maybe someone like you, I can see you're wearing Nikes, right? And like, I would never wear high tops. I just think they feel weird on me. So like, I probably wouldn't wear high tops. So like, I'm not their market. So when they're pushing into their differentiation, they're thinking about also like, what problem am I solving? Nick likes high top, so we got to make something high top that solves some kind of problem, whether it's fashion or like practical or whatever it is. But also then you have to get into like a guiding policy. So you basically have to try to overcome all the obstacles that you're defining in the diagnosis. So maybe Nike is saying like, we need to differentiate. How do we do that? And they'll have to have this overall competitive theme, and they'll have to think about their market segmentation. So are they going to have standardized products? Are they going to, develop for certain segments, which I think they probably do. They also go through like focused. I'm sure they make like custom shoes, especially for athletes and stuff like that. And when you're going through these ideas, you have to think about like, how am I going to solve these problems, but also like, think about the things that we discussed before, like innovation and efficiency and all these kind of things. And I think Nike does a great job at doing something like that. That's why they're obviously so successful. But if I had to think about Nike's strategy, like I'm sure the high ups there must know. I'm not really sure what it is. Like, is it to push street fashion? Is it just to be a jack of all trades for shoes? I mean, that could be it, I guess. But realistically, they might end up having the lowest cost. Like Nike shoes probably don't cost that much to make. They have huge factories, distribution networks, partnerships all over the world. So they're not competing with the local Walmart brand. That's got nothing. But they might be like, okay, we're a premium brand, but we're going to be like we're going to be targeting all kinds of different markets. So here's our Nike Premium. We've got our strategy. Here's the Nike Basics. They have their strategy, and you're targeting a bunch of different people. Most brands can't do that. You can't have a small company that's saying we're going to target everybody. Nike, billions and billions of dollars. You can just say like, I think Apple's kind of a good example of that. Like Apple only sells basically premium products. And they have a few things that are a bit cheaper, but the SE and stuff like that. But realistically, like even now, they're getting rid of the Mini to like even upgrade that to make it more premium, and they're just not focused on the low end of the market. That's why Androids and some of the cheaper Samsung phones even, they kind of like dominate that market, and especially like the Chinese phones. Like good quality, low. They might only work for like a couple of years. They might have like some bloatware and stuff like that, but they're cheap. So basically when you're doing that, you're just trying to get all these things together so it's very consistent. So everyone in your organization understands completely what you're doing.
Really cool that how you mentioned you use Nike as an example of how they kind of spread their wings they kind of casted their net really wide to see what they would get, and then eventually kind of settled on one thing. But now they're kind of doing everything that they can to kind of spread that brand farther. But for like an independent creator or independent just entrepreneur, like a target audience is something that they would have to kind of either maybe through trial and error have to find, and then they'll have to focus on that one aspect and just continually be consistent with what they're doing. In regards to target audiences, what is like one of the initial steps that you would try to get to see, say you're starting to figure out what is your audience? What would be one of the first pushes that you would try to do just to see where your product or your service lands at? And how would you kind of go about measuring that audience?
Your target audience is basically someone or group of people that have a particular problem. So once you figure out what that pain point is, what that problem is, you can think about how you can do something better than everyone else. So basically you're looking at the pain point, you're figuring out what you can do better than everyone else. If you can't have the lowest price, don't try to compete on lowest price or lowest cost, I guess I should say. If you can't have something that's more innovative than everyone else, then don't bother with that. I mean, you can mix these things to create something different. And a lot of companies do that. Like for example, Dell used to do that, where they're differentiated, where you can go in and custom build, but it's also like a pretty attractive price. So they kind of expand that matrix to kind of almost create their own category. And then of course, a bunch of followers do it afterwards, right? And you figured out this problem, you figured out what it is. And now there's a lot of different theories to figure out what you want to do. Now, there's some companies that will just push everything out as fast as possible and just like fail fast, which I think works. I think that's fine. But also that it depends on how many resources you have, right? Like if I have $100 and I'm trying to start a company and I just like fail fast and like probably I have nothing left. There's other theory that I think works best for me, and again, this is a bit personal to see like what works best for you or for your company, but would be like the lean strategy. The lean strategy being, I'm going to maybe release something in like a beta, or release something. I mean, if you're thinking about like technology, but if you're thinking about like a product, I'm going to release something that's like pretty thin, and see if people like it. So there was a book written, The Lean Startup. It's a very famous book, and they talk about like how, for example, the shoe store Zappos, they came about, and basically what the guy did, it was just like he went to the local shoe store, took a bunch of pictures, put them online, and then when people bought them, he just went to the shoe store, bought them, and then shipped them. Now, did he lose money? I mean, I assume so. I assume he probably lost some money, but it didn't matter, right? He figured out that this business strategy would work. And now, I mean, I don't know how much Zappos is worth now, but a lot more than I have, I'm sure. And they were one of the pioneers in, the online shoe stores. So I'm assuming like, okay, so CEO of Zappos goes out and he finds his target market. He says, people want to buy shoes online. We need to do this. He starts with a lean strategy, see if it works. And now he can invest in this idea, knowing that it's at least worked somewhat. Now, will he have to pivot and try new things, and some things will fail? Most likely. I mean, I don't know if there's a business on earth that just like, it's just straight up. There's always setbacks and, personnel and, all these different things that happen. But now that you have that, you have to go through and like, that lean strategy also talks a lot about primary research, right? He's getting all this primary research by himself. He's going out and figuring out exactly like who's buying, where they're buying from, because he's like shipping it out himself as well. What kind of shoes sell well? Did you put a bunch of shoes on there that never sold? I mean, maybe there is a certain amount. I used to have a student actually who was from Singapore, and apparently in Singapore it's difficult to get some like certain shoes, maybe the new Nikes, new Jordans or something. And there's a website or a company in Singapore that basically buys the shoes and then resells them. I mean, you're not doing that for low quality shoes. Like this has got to be high quality because they're taking their commissions and all that kind of stuff. So, but you could also say, you could do that in a lean strategy as well, right? I can buy just like, I'm going to buy this year's Jordans. I'm going to buy 10 pairs, see if people buy them. If they do, then I'll buy the next generation or whatever. And maybe it starts as a side gig and then it gets into a full-time job or something, but it kind of depends. But then you're collecting that primary research. And I mean, obviously secondary research, you can just go online and find that out or read books or interviews and all that kind of stuff to get that. But the successful entrepreneurs, they're able to put all this stuff together. Hey, X plus Y equals 5. How do they know that? I mean, because they've put the time in generally, or they're genius, I guess. But it kind of depends. And some people get lucky. I mean, that happens too, right? Like we've all been there where we got a client or whatever, and just they kind of fell into our lap type thing and whatnot. But generally, this happens because of experience and research and going through and testing and just figuring everything out. The same way, like with music, right? You might throw a few tracks together and say, what, I think this will work, and you listen to it and like, it doesn't work. Or it does, or like, this works, but I need to just like, tweak a little bit.
It's really neat that you bring in like, just having listened to everything, the ideal of kind of, you need to take a little bit of an initial risk to kind of see where the trajectory can go. And like, it kind of brings to mind how some of the more like, and this might be a silly example, but how some of the more like high-end like boutique fashions kind of do, where they'll do like capsule collections where it kind of keeps the value high, but also they're kind of testing the waters to see what will be the style or the aesthetic that will be the selling point and eventually go on to become their real like target and like that what they're going to be known for it. So very cool, very cool. I know we're kind of getting into time here and stuff, but before we go, just curious, what is, off the top of the head, what is a company or an organization or just someone you see doing something you consider to be like right? Like you're watching this organization make the right steps to either go from like just from the startup to finally like upper echelon, or even maybe it might be like a more of like a corporate entity that you see doing things that you would use as like a textbook example of like this is how you should go about it. I know I'm starting to put you on the spot. Sorry, but this is your wealth of knowledge. So
one of the best examples of doing something well is Google. So in the 90s, Microsoft, they basically tried to sell everything, right? And then Google comes around. And they've got this free search engine. It's better than everyone else. And they just like collect all this information. Every time you put something in, they got more and more and more. And it's like a cycle, like a flywheel, basically just like getting faster and faster. And then they think about like, let's get YouTube and let's start like docs and sheets and all this stuff. And they're getting more and more information. They're just collecting and collecting and collecting. And of course, the more information they have, the more money they make from ads, right? Because they can be more pinpointed and stuff like that. So instead of selling all these packages, they just give everything away for free because they're just collecting the information and then collecting the money from ads and whatnot. And now you get into it, and like Google has like how many services? Like dozens, if not hundreds of services. And they've got their hand basically in like every pie possible. And then they jump into the cloud and like all this stuff. But they're collecting all your information, which ethics aside is genius. Right, they have all this information. Nick typed in XYZ. We know exactly what to target him. The last time that he came on, he's looking for microphones. This time he's looking for headsets. Let's give him an ad maybe about mixers or something, and then they've got you. But that spiral of knowledge and just like so they have this product, they get all this information, they make the product better, so more people use it. They get more information. They make it better, it keeps going, and then they filter all this into their ad business. It's genius, right? Like it just makes sense. And then they look around and they see all these small companies doing great things as well. Let's buy that too. Let's get that right. So I guess if I want to look at let's look at, I'm not sure exactly what the company is called, but the product's called Midjourney. So Midjourney is an AI program, basically. I'm not sure if it's AI. I know like a friend of mine actually told me, don't use AI in situations and use machine learning. But I got to admit, I'm not like totally versed in this. So I'm just going to call it AI because they call it AI. And anyway, so Midjourney is an AI art program, basically, where you just type in a few things and it'll give you some art, some digital art. And so I tried it. And I typed in, man walking in Taipei drinking coffee. And it gave me four different pictures to choose from. And I picked, let's say top left corner, and I want to refine it or give me more examples, and it will, and it'll do that and whatnot, and it'll give me better quality. And you can change your prompts, and you can, maybe this guy is, too short for what I want. I want it a little taller, or maybe, I want him to be wearing a red jacket or something. You fix these things. But it gives you these pretty cool works of art. And I'm sure, like, if you were using a professional setting, you'd have to tweak them or get, like, graphic designer to go through them and kind of touch them up. But for someone like me who's, not really artistic, can get something pretty high quality really quickly, and maybe some tweaks, or maybe I can use a part of it for, some of my content articles or something like that. It's pretty cool. And what I think they're doing is really smart is that they've released the beta, and I'm sure they've had like, hundreds of beta testers, if not thousands before, but now they're introducing the public. So you've got to get in this wait list. So already like you get excited about like getting on there. And then you get to go on, they give you like 25 tries basically. And then after that, it's like, okay, now you got to pay. So they give you this like a little bit of they say, okay, our product's great. We know it's great. So we're going to give you 25 for free just to show you how great it is. And then we're going to get you hooked. And then you get hooked and you go on there and you do all these cool stuff. And I just think they're doing kind of like a lean startup type thing. And I'm sure that it was expensive to start, and I'm sure the computing power must be outrageous for something like this. But they're testing the things to see what's good, but they're also collecting all this data, right? Every time that I wrote in 25 things for my demo or whatnot, they've got 25 more. And thousands of people are doing this. And it's refining the AI, it's making it better and better and better and better. And just like, I don't know, for me, I just think it's just such a great way of doing it. And then they're going on, I don't know if they're getting people to do this, but a lot of people like on LinkedIn and Instagram or Twitter, they're showing off these pictures, they're just getting free marketing and just like, okay, so what does Midjourney do better than everyone else? Because you also have DALL-E, you have another program called Jasper, who do copywriting and they just like write articles and stuff like that. They're introducing art. Now you're going to get to the point like which one's the best or the cheapest, right? So most people are going to say, okay, I'm going to use Midjourney, let's say, because it's the absolute best. Why would I use anything else? It's perfect. Or they might say, I'm going to use Midjourney because it costs $1 a month, right? So they're going to have to figure out where the strategy is. I would say like going through that kind of lean process, the beta testing and all that, they're doing a really good job. But now in the next year or so, when companies figure out how to do this, that's when the real challenge is going to be. And it might end up being who just has the deeper pockets. DALL-E is associated with OpenAI, which is associated with Google. I don't know who Midjourney is associated with, or if it's just a bunch of other people, like independents doing it. But it could be a challenge if you have to go against Google, right? Or maybe Google just end up buying them up. So it's going to be a couple of years to see, but I really like their strategy right now because it's hot right now. AI, stuff like that, like copywriting and art making. This stuff is really attractive right now. So push it hard as you can and then see where it goes from there.
I like that you brought up AI creation of either visuals or article writing. It's nuts. And I like that you mentioned that ideal of kind of like signing up to see if you get the beta invite, because that is, if anything, that is one of the best ways to breed organic hype and popularity, because people want to share it because they're excited. And that's that whole idea of like creating this notion of, what is that? Like a kind of like a limited time, kind of like, this only in select quantities and stuff. So it's nice because it makes people feel part of something new. And yeah, like free publicity based off of that, it's always going to be nice instead of like something very pushed and forced. So thank you for your time, and Really good insight on everything. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I mean, it's great. I love the podcast. Thank you for inviting me in for VIS Radio. Really appreciate the opportunity. I hope this helps. I know it's not perfect. Go out and read a few of these books. I mean, like I said, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, great place to start. And I think once people start asking more questions, they're going to get closer to the root cause or the root strategy that they really need to do. And my one piece of advice, especially for small businesses or young entrepreneurs, would be if you can continue asking why, you're not there yet. Just keep asking. You might not get there right away. You might have to sleep on it. You might figure it out over coffee. But just keep asking until you get to that point. And then once you do, how can you do this better than everyone else? And if you have those two things, then you're so much closer than you would have been without them.
Storybook ending, and words to live by, honestly. Thank you, Byron Clarke, for your time from VIS Radio. This is Nick Collier signing off. Wish everybody to have a good rest of the day.